Well, welcome once again to the Big Ten, the Ten Commandments study. And we are in week 2, chapter 2, which is actually the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Some versions say no other gods in place of me. The meaning there basically is no other gods in my presence, no other gods in plain sight, nothing in addition to or beyond what I am, as if I am God. You don't need anything else. We talked about a little bit last week about the fact that God does not want to be number one, the top. He wants to be the most. So he doesn't just want to be the top of your list. He wants to be most of your list. Not just I'm number one, I am part of everything you do. So it's kind of interesting if you think back, what did you do for the last 3 months? 3 months ago, what did you do? Now, in our life, we've had a lot of things happen in the last 3 months, just way too much. But it had been 3 months since they left Egypt. And how quickly we kind of forget where we've come from. We get caught up in where we are. So it wasn't too long since Exodus 15 that Miriam sang, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. Your right hand, O Lord, has become glorious power. Your right hand, O Lord, has dashed the enemy in pieces, and in greatness of your excellence, you have overthrown those who rose against you. That's where they came from. They sang the song after he had them cross the Red Sea, and they watched what would have overtaken them be destroyed. That probably would not be something I would quickly forget. Very poignant in the mind, very much, I can't forget what I've seen. And we've all seen things that we'd like to unsee. I don't know how they could forget what they saw, but how quickly we forget. So we forget what God has done in our lives. Now, if you think about it and you break down your life, from the time you were an infant to childhood to teenager to young adult to raising children, empty nester, golden years, if you did a timeline and you took like a 6-foot piece of paper and just made, when you were born, and then, of course, you obviously don't know when you're not going to be around, but if you do 6, 70, 80 years, just make it that way, draw your little lines, take your ruler, and then you go back and, okay, from the time you were 1 to 5, what did God do for you? From the time you were 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and obviously, probably from 18 or 20 years on, you're going to have a lot more things that God did because you're much more active. Your life is bigger. And then if you start having children, get married, have children, oh my goodness, things change quickly. Life happens. And how quickly we forget it. If we drew a lifeline of what God has done for us, it would remind us of the incredible things that God has done, but it also remind us who God is. And it would remind us that there is no mistaking the presence of God. None. So they had been living in Egypt, and Egypt worshipped the Canaanite idols. They worshipped the different gods. They had a god for just about everything. And if we went back to the 10 plagues, all the plagues were aimed at the different gods that would represent whatever the plague was, and aimed at it because it could not do what the Lord God Almighty could do. And the first commandment really focuses on what we're going to worship. But then we have to define what worship is and what an idol is. Because a god is an idol. Don't put anything else before me. So how would we spot our idols or our other gods? How do we spot them? Well, one definition is, what thing, if it were absent, you could not live without? That might be your god or your idol. What do you turn into a good thing into an ultimate thing, something that you can't live without? That would be a god or an idol. What do we elevate? What do we just look at our lives and go, I can't live without that, or I choose not to live without that? Can become a god or an idol. And to the ultimate, who created us and who set in motion life, set in motion our bodies, how bodies are created, how babies develop in the womb, and how children are born helpless, and then how they develop the ability to eat by themselves and crawl and walk and mature and grow. An incredible thing the Creator started. And when we think about worship and we think about who and why God would say no other gods or no other idols in place of me, one of the reasons is because it would eliminate, or it would promote, unity. So by forbidding the worship of other gods, it's going to promote a unity because everyone is worshiping the same thing, and your religious differences are mostly brought on by the different things you worship. So if we all worship God, we are going to establish God as that ultimate authority, as the one who is the basis, the fulcrum of our faith. So if we worship God, if he is the ultimate, what we cannot live without, then we are going to, it's going to be a unified, because that's the culture we're worshiping with. That's what we all recognize. It also would lead, it would guard us against the confusion of spiritual natures when there's many different beliefs. It protects our heart. Many of the ancient societies were polytheistic, which means many gods. And God says, I am going to insist to prevent your hearts from loneliness and the disappointment that idols and other gods cannot fulfill in you. If you worship me alone, I am the one to fulfill your dreams and your needs. And if you think about it, God delivered them before he asked them to love him by obedience. Legalism says if you do this, you get this. We do it sometimes to our kids. We bribe our kids. Okay, now if you do this, you get this. That's not how God did it. God delivered them. God took care of them. God provided for them. And then he says, okay, based on what I have done for you, I'd like you to love me. And I want you to trust me, since I created you, that I know what love me means. And that means to obey me. And there's some simple ways we're going to obey me because I know how you work. I created you. So we really trust our heart in God's hands. So worshiping God as monotheistic also just really established that Jewish identity. Other cultures didn't have that because they had polygods. The Jewish culture worshiped God. So faithfulness to God, actually, in what God is asking us, leads to a very unique moral and ethical plan of life. And it's that significance that God is saying, I want you set apart. I want you to be different. It's kind of a preliminary to the grace of the New Testament. I've saved you. Now, because I saved you, your gratitude toward me will be you love and you obey me. It's kind of that visual of the gospel. So that the sense of direction we have in our lives is based on the God we serve. If the first commandment is true and we live it as it is the truth we believe, then our sense of purpose and direction totally is reflective on the God who created us. And the God who created us builds that unity. It's a social bond. It encourages all the other commandments as they line up. It encourages us to be kind, to be compassionate, and not just be nice for nice sake, but love and create a bond in a society that really loves based on how the Creator who made us loved us. So the first commandment, it's going to crowd anything else out of our thinking, so that if we are made in God's image is what we aspire to, and that's why we don't put anything else in place of him. The first commandment also just basically establishes God as our creator. And it's an interesting walk when we think about no other gods before me. It's not just no other gods, because we're going to say, oh, I don't think I have any other gods, and I don't think I'm making any idols. But yet what he's saying is no person, no object, no task, no pleasure, nothing in your priorities, nothing in your plans, nothing in your affections should be before your Creator, the one who made you. So if we go back to the Old Testament, and we just go back to the Bible in general, we're going to find in some examples of people who did not recognize the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And we put other things in place of God. So let's go to Genesis 19, and we're going to talk about Lot's wife. Now, Lot's wife had a lot of things happening in her life. Women were not a part of the decision making in that society. They had been working together, Lot and Abraham, and if you've ever worked with family or relatives or friends, sometimes those working environments don't always turn out. And so here they split. Lot went one way, Abraham went another, and Lot ended up in Sodom. That's a questionable place. But for some reason, Lot's wife was comfortable in an awkward place. Maybe it was home. Maybe it was where her heart was. But when the angels came and told Lot to flee, she didn't recognize God and that authority, and having no other gods in place of her, being safe in a place that she felt comfortable, even with all the interesting things happening in Sodom, that was more important than who God was. Lot, the leader of the family, the angels, the men that had come to visit, telling Lot to get out before God would destroy it, she didn't trust them as the leader. And of course, there's a lot of things that have gone into what has happened with the daughters and the future son-in-laws and the men of the city of Sodom. I'd be a little questioning too, but for some reason, Lot's wife was comfortable there, even with all the things going on. She didn't trust the leadership. And I'm not sure after some of the things if I might have not trusted the leadership either, but she didn't look at God as the one to trust and put him first. And she looked back. We all look back to a certain degree at things, and partially because we're more comfortable looking back than our fear of looking forward. So in Exodus 32, they come off after Moses got the commandments. He disappeared up the mountain and he didn't come back for a bit. We quickly get worried when things aren't quite the way we think they should be. And he was up in the mountain, he didn't come back, and so everybody's getting really worried about it. And so they decide that instead of looking to the leader, Aaron, to be a leader, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, let us make gods who will go before us." They wanted to abandon the leader who didn't come back for something they could understand. They were visual. Now, why a cow? Well, they would have worshipped a cow in Egypt. That would have been part of their cycle of pagan worship. They would have understood a cow, give us a cow. But I guess what I'm thinking is, why didn't Aaron stand up and say, it's not a good idea? Whoa, let's stop and think about this. Leaders don't let the followers tell the leader what to do. Leaders lead. And with Moses, who was the leader, although Aaron did a lot of the talking, the people felt they needed to change a leader. So they were going to exchange the leader of Moses, not necessarily for Aaron to lead them, but for Aaron to make something that they could worship. And it says, come and make us gods as for this fellow Moses. We don't know what's happened to him. They didn't trust the God who created them to wait. Waiting is hard. Waiting sometimes takes way too long. So we get impatient and we come up with better ideas, we think. Why did they worship it? Why didn't they just say, let's do kumbaya around the campfire? The heart of man needs to worship something. If we don't worship God, we will worship something else. We'll find something else. And they chose their gold to make. Now, gold was valuable, so they're going to place the value of what they have in their hand and make it something to worship. We do that with our stuff today. We have storage lockers full of stuff that we're paying to store that we can't use, but we worship it enough to pay for it, to be protected, that we can't use it. It kind of becomes an idol. So then we jump into Judges 16, and we see a good example, or a poor example, I guess we should say, poor example of someone whose ego was his judge, was his God. Judges 16 talks about Samson, and it starts a few chapters before that when Samson's parents took on a vow for Samson. Now, it's never a good idea when you decide what somebody else should do. Doesn't go well. They took on a vow for Samson that he would live a certain way. Samson didn't have that vow internally. It was something he was imposed upon. So what happens after a while when someone has told you this is what you think, this is how you're going to act? Eventually go, well, I want to think for myself and I want to act for myself. And so Samson, he did not listen to the God, and his gods became his ego. His ego, he had his strength, he had his hair, and he had his friends. But it didn't take long for him to find prostitutes, for him to find people that were not the wise counsel, for him to fall in love with somebody else. He made poor choices because his no other God before his God was his ego. He wasn't listening to God, partially because he had aligned himself up with pagan people who didn't observe and worship the God of the Creator. So it's interesting when Samson lost his hair, and when his strength was gone and his friends were absent, and he's in a prison grinding, he had a lot of time to think about. And when you have a lot of time to think about things, sometimes we come back to what gave us our strength, what gave us our pride, what gave us our mission in life. And in the prison, blinded, with his strength gone, he was running a grist mill. He was pushing to grind the barley or the wheat or the oats. He probably had a lot of time to think. And that's when we go back to leaning on the God that we've put other things in place of. And for Samson, it was his ego and his trickery and his slyness that by himself he pulled off pretty good, but he could not without the power of God. I think the most effective lesson that we can learn is in the New Testament. It's in Mark 10, and one of the things that we talk about with no other gods before me is what if you were to lose? What would be that ultimate that you can't live without? And a rich young ruler came to Jesus, and he called him good teacher. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, he was a good man. He did all the good things. He probably gave blood, and he probably had a sticker on that told him he gave blood, and he did all the things he should do. He was a good person. And it was obvious that he was trying to find that one other thing he could do to get eternal life. But he called teacher good teacher. That kind of tells us that he wanted to be good. He wanted to do the right thing. And there's nothing wrong with doing good and doing the right thing. But if that's our motive, so Jesus says, why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. And then he says, you know the commandments. You shall not murder, commit adultery, not steal, not give false testimony, you shall not defraud, you shall honor your father and your mother. It's interesting that when Jesus says those, he starts with 6, 7, 8, 9, and then comes back to 5. He doesn't talk about the first 4. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not have any graven images. Thou shalt keep my name, and you shall keep... He doesn't talk about those 4. Because what we find is the foundation of thou shalt have no other gods before me sets all the others up. If we get our foundation right, if we don't have anything else in place of God or in the presence of God, it's God alone, our decision-making is different. So this young man says, I have kept these from the time I was a boy. I've been a good boy. I've done all these things. I am good. And Jesus looked at him and loved him. Now, think about it. You sometimes give advice to people, and you just give advice. And maybe you like them, but you're not invested. But when you love somebody, and someone calls and asks for your advice, you're going to treat them differently because you love them. And Jesus looked at him and loved him. His heart went out to him. He was invested in this young man's heart. And he said, one thing you lack. And I'm sure at that point the young man's going, one thing, I can do it. I can be good. I got one thing and I've done it, nailed it. And Jesus is saying, go sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have the treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. And verse 22 said, "At this the man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. Do not put any other gods in place of me before me." This young man's money was his God. And he could do everything he could do with the commandments, but if it meant putting God first, the money was more important. And his face fell and he walked away sad because he expected to have another list. Check it off, I've nailed it. So, what does this mean for our living room? What does this mean for the things we're going to do every day? Well, Matthew 22 says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul." Don't put anything in place of God. So, the commandment is kind of an allegiance. What do we mean when we talk about allegiance? Well, we all know the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States. But allegiance is where our loyalty lies. And there's many times when my allegiance to something is out of duty, not out of love. And I treat it differently. So if I'm only being dutiful, like the young man, he was doing his duty and being good. But his heart wasn't in it because his heart didn't have God as the premier number most, not number one, number most of everything he controlled. He had all his things he'd done, which were good, but he was not allowing God to be the most of everything that would be affected in his life. God would affect his money. God would affect his time. God would affect. He had done all the commandments, but not the first one that mattered most of all. So foundations, cornerstones are crucial so that the structure you build upon them stands. We know that's true. If you have a foundation that leans, your building is going to lean. If you have a foundation that's just crumbled rock, it's not going to stand. If you have a crack in your foundation, stuff can get through and your building's going to be compromised. So the first commandment sets that foundation that all the other commandments are built upon. Do not have any other gods before me, in the place of me, in the presence of me, beyond me, next to me, in addition to. Do not have any person, any object, any task, any pleasure, nothing except the Creator of the universe, who made you, who knows you, and who loves you. See you next time.